If you're looking for a translation of the Bible that will help you understand what the biblical authors were trying to communicate, then the King James Version is not for you. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and the King James Version is most valuable as a literary artifact. It is not very valuable when it comes to trying to understand what the biblical authors were trying to communicate. There are many other translations today that do a far better job, and there are three main reasons that the King James Version is not helpful if you're trying to understand what the biblical authors were trying to communicate. The first is that it is wildly out of date. In fact, it was already considered out-of-date language in the very year it was published in 1611. And that's because it's a very conservative revision of a very conservative revision of a very conservative revision going back almost a century to the New Testament of William Tyndale and the New Testament and Old Testament of Tyndale and Miles Coverdale. And so when it was published, it was already being criticized for using out-of-date language. And it's only gotten worse in the 400 plus years since. And as just one example, in the letter of Jude, verse 22 says, "But of some have compassion, making a difference." And overwhelmingly today, people are going to understand making a difference to having a positive impact or influence. And that's a wonderful message. That has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with what the King James translators were trying to say, because that phrase, making a difference, didn't become connected to the notion of having a positive impact or a positive influence until around the year 1900. In 1611, it meant making a distinction. So the King James translators were trying to say, have compassion, but be discerning on whom you're going to have compassion. And this same verse brings up the second issue with the King James Version. It is based on inferior manuscripts. It's based on a traditional Greek New Testament cobbled together beginning with Desiderius Erasmus at the beginning of the 16th century. This tradition has become known as the Textus Receptus, and the King James Version went back to the third edition of Erasmus's Textus Receptus in order to inform their revision of the Bishop's Bible. And the Textus Receptus, while a phenomenal work of scholarship in the 16th century, is out of date. We have many more manuscripts, far more reliable manuscripts, far earlier manuscripts, and a far more refined art of textual criticism that has allowed us to cobble together a much more reliable source text for translations of the New Testament. And there are many ways that our critical texts today differ from the Textus Receptus. In addition to the fact that we now know that there are about 16 or so passages that were in the King James Version that were not in the earliest manuscripts to which we have access. And so many translations of the New Testament today will simply omit those passages, which freaks a lot of people out, but is actually a more accurate, more reliable translation. But additionally, in Jude, verse 22, we know that the participle that is being translated making a difference is not in the nominative. It should be in the accusative. So it's not just telling you how you're supposed to have compassion. It's telling you on whom you're supposed to have compassion. On those who are trying to make a distinction. On those who are doubting. On those who are going back and forth. That's the group of people on whom you're supposed to be showing compassion. And that's why if you look up this verse in many modern translation, it will have nothing to do with what the King James Version was trying to say. And so when it comes to manuscripts, we can reconstruct a far more reliable, far more accurate New Testament than they could in 1611. And then the third reason that the King James Version is not going to be helpful for trying to understand what the biblical authors are trying to communicate is that we have a much better understanding of ancient Greek, ancient Hebrew, ancient Aramaic, and much better translation philosophies and methodologies today. The King James Version was overly literal and frequently punted to just reproducing the form of the source language in the target language, which led to indecipherable English. So for instance, here is 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 5 in the King James Version. But if any have caused grief, he hath not grieved me, but in part, that I may not overcharge you all. This is utterly incomprehensible. you can try as long as you want to figure out what exactly is going on here. You will be wrong. Because what they've done here is follow slavishly the word order of the Greek, which doesn't help syntactically, because we don't have cases like they do in Greek. A translation that better understands the Greek and tries to render the sense of the Greek in the English is the updated edition of the New Revised Standard Version, which makes clear what's really going on here. But if anyone has caused grief, he has caused it not to me, but to some extent, not to exaggerate it, to all of you. So you're never going to arrive at that understanding of the King James English, because it is based on an outdated and an inadequate translation philosophy and methodology, which retreats to just reproducing the form of the source syntax in the target syntax, which frequently is going to result in misunderstanding. So for those three reasons, the King James Version is not going to help you understand what the biblical authors were trying to communicate. It's frequently going to get in the way of that understanding. And we have other translations that do a far better job, that are up to date on the scholarship, up to date on translation philosophies and methodologies, up to date on where the manuscripts stand. And that is why, if you want a Bible that is going to help you understand what the biblical authors were trying to communicate, the King James Version is not for you. I would recommend something like the updated edition of the New Revised Standard Version. And the fit for this video has been The Last Ronin,